So thanks for spending an hour with us. We're really excited to be with you here on this 19th day of the fourth quarter of the year. Can you believe it? Somehow we've blinked and summer's over and we're looking ahead at the holidays. So at Mission Minded, we really know that the end of year can be stressful for many of our partners and our clients. You're trying to wrap up your work and set budgets, call donors to action, all while prioritizing family and friends and rest. So as the year winds down, unfortunately, it tends to be that communications of all forms are ramping up. You may already be hard at work crafting messages for the giving season or crafting stories for your annual report and strategizing your year-end communications. And while the calls to action for all those things might feel fairly clear, it can be hard at times to know where to get started weaving an ask or some year-end call to action into a larger narrative if you don't have a clear set of foundational messages. Without a set of core evergreen messages, writing can at times feel directionless, and that feeling of writer's block can come about, which none of us love. And through that process, we can often miss the opportunity to articulate your organization's value and impact. So we're here today to ensure that you don't get bogged down by some of that end of year communications chaos by helping you craft or tighten up the key messages that are going to serve as the foundation for all of your seasonal messaging to come. You've been hearing me talk for a minute now, but I should introduce myself. My name is Abby Myers. I sit in Denver, Colorado, and I'm the Associate Director of Strategy at Mission Minded, which means that I champion all things strategic thinking. I partner with our strategists and our clients to ensure that the big ideas developed in our work together maintain their integrity and impact through every medium that they're activated on. And I'm joined by my colleague, Elisa, who is a strategist with Mission Minded, and she's going to tell you a little bit about herself as well as what it means to be a strategist at Mission Minded.
Thanks, Abby. Great to see everybody here. My name is Elisa Wiseman. Like Abby said, I am a strategist here at Mission Minded, and I am based in Washington, D.C. And in my role as a strategist, I am a thought partner, a problem solver, and really a champion for our client partners. So I partner closely with them from the very beginning of an engagement all the way through to the very end to help them navigate this process, to connect dots that will really set them on a stronger path forward, and to unlock those opportunities that they can leverage as a result of having embarked on rebranding efforts.
Thanks, Elisa. That's a little bit about us as individuals, but collectively we are Mission Minded, which is a strategy and creative firm that helps good causes have greater impact. We believe that organizations like yours that make our world a better place need to be unapologetically bold. So every day we challenge our partners to ask what if on their journey of uncovering that uniquely bold story. And we help them find opportunities to break the mold and fire up their supporters. Because we know that when your community is united by magnetic ideas, they'll stop at nothing to help you achieve extraordinary results, which is what we're all pushing toward here at year end. We've had the pleasure of partnering with thousands of nonprofits, foundations, and educational institutions to help them achieve those extraordinary results through extraordinary communications materials. Because the reality is that no matter where your organization is in its life cycle of communications, whether you're opening up a new space, whether you're embarking on an admissions campaign, or maybe a fundraising campaign, you're communicating your impact at year end, or rolling out a new website, or simply creating awareness about your cause, compelling and clear communications are essential to these initiatives' success. What we say and how it's communicated can often be our first impression for new audiences and what helps us either stand out from or blend in with our peers. When we get asked questions like, what does your organization do? What impact do you have? What will my dollars go towards if I do donate? How is your mission different than other missions close to yours? It's really essential to have a quick and compelling response. Oftentimes, we find that people from the same organization will have countless different responses to these same questions. And while their responses are all factual, inconsistency in those responses leads to an unmemorable or potentially watered down brand story. And when audiences don't know the core of who you are or why it matters, they're less likely to feel compelled to engage with you, donate, give, connect, volunteer, all the things that we need at year end. So we're here today to ensure that your calls to action get answered by shoring up the backbone of your messaging. We'll start by sharing a few words about brand and why your brand is an essential part of your messaging. We'll then share some tips and tricks for how to message in the most inclusive way possible before moving into our 4-part minute message model. And this is a framework that's designed to help you communicate what your organization does and why it matters in a concise, consistent, and compelling way. We'll leverage that framework to craft memorable communications with ease and confidence, helping your organization attract more support from more people this year end. So this image provides a nice breakdown of the framework that we're going to work through together today for all those visual learners out there like me. Your organization should have one primary belief message that everyone within it can use no matter their role in your work. From there, you have an opportunity to share why your organization is needed by illustrating the problems that exist in society that give rise to the need for your services. Your impact in this space is then best illustrated through a story before going on to describe all the various programmatic details of your work. This framework teaches you to flip the script on the way you communicate, sharing what you believe first and foremost before diving into all those details. So by the end of this session, you will have learned a few things. We'll have learned how to create messages that are distinctive and inspiring, that are inclusive and paint a picture of the problem you exist to solve, that stay with your listeners, and most importantly, use your time well. So before we dive into messaging, we first just have to share a few words about brand. As a brand and creative firm, it's really essential to us that we communicate to you why this is an important part of storytelling. The value of brand and marketing can sometimes be contended in the nonprofit space due to limited resources, but the truth is that your organization has a brand, whether you know it or you like it or not. And that brand can either hurt you or help you on your journey to achieving your mission. This is the case because your brand is synonymous with your reputation. Clarifying your brand focuses your reputation in the direction that you want it to go, and it allows you to set intentionality around what people think about you. Your brand doesn't change your mission, but you should use your brand as a filter for programmatic and operational decisions in order to create a compelling and consistent story about not just who you are, but why it matters. So because your brand exists in the mind of your stakeholders, whether we like it or not, we have to be mindful of all the places it shows up. At Mission Minded, we like to think that our brand shows up in how we look, how we sound, what we do, and how we act. Every turn, really. So because of this, your brand should really infiltrate your organization and inform your behaviors, regardless if it feels like a branding or marketing activity or not. Your brand really does touch every part of your organization, which means that brand is everyone's responsibility. So today, you all become brand ambassadors, and you're taking the first step by evolving your ability to communicate effectively on behalf of your brand. I'm going to pass it over to Elisa to just talk about what brand can do for messaging and how we invite people in from the very start.
Thanks, Abby. Let's talk about messages. We told you just now that by the end of this session, you will know how to create distinctive and inspiring and memorable messages. And in order to do that, we have to make sure that these messages are rooted in inclusivity and that they actively invite people into your work. We know that the strongest messages are inclusive ones. So we're going to review here some important guidelines and tips and tricks that will keep your messages accessible and understandable and therefore inclusive. And we're starting off here with a pretty simple one. Use your name, by which we mean use your full name. Tons of nonprofits are relying on acronyms to shorten those names, but acronyms can be really confusing to audiences if they aren't familiar with what your acronym stands for or any shortened version of your name. It makes them feel like outsiders, and those in the know become insiders. And we want to proactively address any opportunities where confusion might leave somebody out of the loop. The other challenge with an acronym or with an abbreviated version of your name is that it fails to send a really clear message about who you are. So if you think about an organization like the ASPCA, you might know that they have something to do with animals, but if I tell you instead about the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, that is a much more powerful message. It's a very different message, and it includes audiences who may not know what those letters stand for. And using your full name is really part of this broader effort that we want to encourage you to practice, which is to avoid jargon altogether. So acronyms, insider vocabulary, made up terminology, it can be hard to avoid because you know so much more about your organization than your audience does. And falling back on that language is really easy to do, but jargon can exclude, it leaves people out. And when you assume that your audience knows what you're talking about, you're missing an opportunity for that deeper connection with them. So avoid that jargon. And when you do have to use it, because sometimes it's unavoidable, be proactive about breaking it down and really defining it for your audiences. And not making assumptions about jargon is also part of this broader theme here, which is to really not make assumptions at all. You never want to assume that your audience understands your organization or what you're talking about at the same level that you do, be it about the details of your work or even why those details matter. Like I said, you know your organization, or at least your role within it, top to bottom. You are immersed in this every day, but your audience isn't. So they may not know or remember why your work is valuable. And that even goes for the people who you think know you really well or who you think should know you really well, maybe your board members or frequent volunteers. We still don't want to assume that they're with us or that they remember all the details. So always take those opportunities to remind them why you do your work. Next, let's talk about naming the thing, which is a really important best practice when it comes to inclusive messaging. Rather than talk around a problem, rather than talk around an inequity or a mistake, use straightforward language that acknowledges the systemic, the social, economic, or the political system at play that has created and maintains that inequity in our society. Name the thing also means not associating or blaming those problems on the individuals who experience them, but rather recognizing that individual challenges are often symptoms of this greater systemic inequity. And naming those things, acknowledging those realities, it allows us to hold more empathy for those who are most impacted by inequitable systems. And it also allows us to not define people by the challenges that they're facing, which is really important in the nonprofit space. So this is just a really important way of preventing the advancement of outdated and often really harmful narratives. Repeat, 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 and then repeat your message one more time, because Americans are exposed to something like 3,000 messages a day. That number is probably higher at this point, and it often takes 12, 15, 20, 25 impressions before something really finally sticks. And when you're working with a huge budget, like a McDonald's budget or an Apple budget, you can easily make sure that your ads and your messages get in front of people 50 times a day, if that's what you want to do. But with a nonprofit budget, you need to make sure that you are repeating those consistent messages over and over again to build those impressions and really finally resonate. You will feel sick of saying something and you'll be worried that you sound repetitive. But the truth is that each and every time you get that same message out there, you are building something. You are building awareness and equity in that message so that it really sticks with the people that you're trying to reach. A simple way here to invite audiences in and help them see themselves in your experience and in your story is to make it personal. And a really easy way of doing this is to use the word you. Your target audience's support is really critical to your success, so you have to involve them in your messaging and help them see how they really are a part of your story, because that simple shift from speaking in really broad general terms to talking directly to a person really can be the difference between feeling welcomed and included and otherwise. This is a good one here, highlight benefits, not features. And this is a good one, but really a tough one, because a lot of organizations, including I'm sure many of yours, do a lot. You have tons of programs and initiatives and services and people and partners and issues that you're trying to tackle. And when you do a lot, it's really easy to start talking about all the details of your work and getting stuck on all of those features. But if the features are the what you're doing, what we want to encourage you to do is to focus on the why behind those features, the benefit of those features. And I'll share a quick example here that always really underscores this point. If I came to you and told you I want to sell you a product, it is a 6-foot long nylon rope and it has a loop on one end, a hook on the other. Who wants to buy that product? Probably not a lot of you, because you don't know why that matters. But if instead I had said, hey, I want to sell you this product, it's going to give you peace of mind and more control over your dog when you go out on a walk. It'll keep them safe from other dogs, from cars on the road. Now you're more interested. And I haven't even told you what this product is called, because those features really aren't at all compelling until you've laid out the value for them, until you've laid out the case for them and told your audiences why they should care. And finally, and this is a really important one here at the end, especially as you think about your year-end messaging, is to clarify your call of action. One of the easiest ways to make people feel in the loop and included and welcomed is to make it really easy for them to understand why you're reaching out at all. Great messages have a goal in mind. You need to know what action you want people to take when they read or hear your message. So know what you want people to do and then work backwards from there to really make sure that that ask is coming through loud and clear. So with all of that said, some final pointers here for really strong messaging before we jump into our model. A good message will clearly point to the problem that you're trying to solve. Every nonprofit is started to solve a problem or answer a challenge in society. And no matter what that problem is, if it's big or if it's small, your messaging needs to name it and really make it clear. A good message doesn't try to say it all. It's really hard to walk away with anything concrete to remember when you are getting a fire hose of information. So go back to that clarified call to action, go back to your goal, and consider what you need to say and also what your audience needs to hear, and maybe find some opportunities there to build stronger focus. And finally, a good message adds an emotional connection. We need to balance the head and the heart in our messages. We rationalize decisions with our head, but we need to feel something when we do that in our hearts. And there's a quote here that really brings that point into really clear focus. The essential difference between emotion and reason is that emotion leads to action while reason leads to conclusions. You need to appeal to both in your messaging because we want to move people into action, right? It's not enough for people to simply understand why your organization needs money. We want them to really feel compelled and inspired to be a part of that.
Thanks, Lisa. We had a question in the chat from my friend Kim Friedman at New Art and Friends School that I just wanted to call out. The question was, can we give an example of name the thing? And I think it's often either in our storytelling or we're talking about our narrative as an organization. We might say something like, the individuals that we serve are historically less likely to own their own homes. But if we don't mention why that's so, systemic inequities, systemic racism, inequities within housing that led to the reason why that is so, it's perpetuating some stereotypes around individuals and not really calling out the true issue that we're trying to get at the heart of. So if you have something like that within your work that you're beating around the bush, if you will, there's an opportunity within your messaging to call that out head on and ensure that if there's something we're referencing indirectly, we make it part of our message to reference it directly. So we're all here today because we want to move people to action. So we want to take the first step toward that by diving into the foundation of any strong message, which is what you believe. Here's that framework again. From here forward, we're going to continue to share this with you at each turn in the framework, and we're going to go through each section of the model, sharing some education around these sections' purposes and their importance. We'll share examples of effective application of them, and then we'll share some practical exercises for crafting your own. And at the end, you should have the tools to walk away with the ability to create a compelling organizational story from start to finish that sets you up to create year-end communications with ease. So the first step in the model is the belief message. This is the first message anyone from your organization can and should share when they are asked who you are and what you do or why your work matters. The belief message defines your vision. It gives high-level information, not every detail about all your programs and services, but a glimpse into them so people understand. And through that, it starts to build comprehension about your work and why it matters. It also suggests the problem that you solve so people understand your impact. Who here has heard of an elevator pitch? I know I can't see your thumbs up, but if you were on video, I'd ask you to give me a thumbs up if you've heard of that. Maybe throw it in the chat. I see some people are raising their hands. Nice, thank you. You found a workaround. I love it. If you're in the for-profit space, the elevator pitch is essentially what you'd say if you only had the length of time of an elevator ride to pitch your idea to an investor or an interested party. And while we may not be pitching nonprofit work in the same way, it's still true that we only have limited time to tell our story in a way that hooks people. So we need that type of message for your nonprofit just as much. In today's hybrid world, we may, for better or worse, be spending less time in elevators, but there's other places and spaces that we would use a message like this. At a party or a networking event, in an end of year ask, absolutely. When introducing yourself to a group, we often find that this is one of the simplest, but most common places that people actually don't have the same message to share. If you're speaking to donors on the homepage of your website, absolutely, and in social media, maybe you're, connecting with a friend at a kid's soccer game, or you're sitting next to someone on an airplane who you don't really want to talk to, but actually they could potentially be, a donor or someone who gets to know more about you. This is the message that you pull out of your back pocket. And so basically it serves a purpose almost everywhere. It's not your vision and your mission, but it is really the deeply held belief that rings true across your organization that should be the first thing that comes up after you get through those initial communications materials. This message should be the first tool you pull from your toolkit when you're sitting down to craft communications. So it should absolutely live as the first, if not second, message on your website. It should be the first thing communicated inside your annual report or on any collateral or brochures, raising awareness about your cause. And it should absolutely, yes, be on the donate page of your website as a reminder for why you matter and the impact that an individual's donation might have should they help you in advancing your mission. It may sound like a big ask to come up with one message to rule them all that works across all these mediums, but don't worry, we have a really scientific, foolproof approach to helping you craft a strong belief message. Give me more hand raises if you have heard of Mad Libs. Seeing a few come up, plus ones. Nice. Mad Libs give us a space to fill in the blanks and use our own creativity while still ensuring that we hit the right points along the way in crafting a message. Now, sometimes these are funny. We don't necessarily recommend your belief message be funny, but it does give you the appropriate places and spaces to craft a message with the right ground rules that make it a little bit easier. So that's what we're going to do together to craft your belief message. The effective Mad Lib formula for your belief message is going to be that at your organization, you believe a deeply held value. So every day you do something for your audiences, because when you do, something wonderful happens, or potentially a problem might persist. Let's share a few examples so you can see what that looks like in action. We've underlined these key sections here in the two examples we're sharing so that you can see them live. Wu Yi Children's Services believes nothing is more essential than excellent childcare and education for all our children right from the start. Every day we partner with parents, as well as countless individuals and organizations across San Francisco to provide a network that strengthens and connects a diverse, resilient community around our children. Because when we stand up for children, we stand up for one another. Now, that's the message that you just saw right there on that donate page. And it's a great way to reinforce who we are, why it matters, and why you should be a part of it. One other example from Canal Alliance, who believes that everyone has the right to achieve their dreams. Every day we educate, empower, and partner with motivated immigrants to best meet all their unique needs, from putting food on the table to becoming American citizens to learning English and graduating from college. Because when we support immigrants, Marin becomes a place where everyone can live, work, and succeed. So you're starting to see a pattern in that we are hitting on a really, exciting, inspiring message right off the bat. And that's what we want to use to hook folks. We're sharing enough about what we do, but not all the details, not enough to bore them or tell them so much they don't need to ask more. And we're rounding it out with why it matters and the impact that we're going to have if we get closer to achieving our mission. So if you're worried that you'll never remember all of this, it really boils down into three simple ideas. We believe, so we do, because if we don't, a problem might persist, or if we do, something wonderful happens, which I hope is a message that many of you can share. So now we want to give you some time to work through your own Mad Lib to write your own belief message for your organization. You might have some form of this for your organization, and this is an opportunity to tighten it up or push on bigger ideas. Or you might not have something like this, and this is a great space to get this started to have something more compelling for year-end communications. So we're going to give you just a few minutes here to either take a screenshot, start to write this on your own, and we can share those examples here as we give you some quiet space to do that. And I'll just give you a sneak peek that if you get to work on this and the other exercises that we put together within this webinar, and you send it in to us at the end, don't worry, we'll give you the contact information. We're happy to help you edit and craft that message together. So you have access to us to be able to be your reviewer and your co-strategist and do all those wonderful things that Elisa mentioned earlier, and being your partner in this work. So take a few minutes, start to fill in the blanks. Imagine you're in that elevator and hitting the high points. And if anyone wants to share theirs in the chat, just even a draft, we can talk them out live, but we'll move on to the next point here in just a few minutes. And as another resource, we'll be sending a follow-up email that has all of these fill in the blanks and the questions that we'll move through. So if you're just passively listening and trying to soak it all in, don't worry, you'll have a worksheet and something to pull off of after this. If anyone still actually has their hand raised, if you're able to formulate that thought into a question, please feel free to put it in the Q&A and in the chat, and we can address it. Tracy Miller, I see, has a question. Is that the same for trade associations? If you are able to clarify a little bit further, I think if you're asking, is this message as important for trade associations for having that one key message? It is actually. I think having that centralized space that has a benefit for those folks is just as important. And there's obviously more detail to come out of that. But I think having a message like this is important regardless of type of organization that you're with. All right. If anyone has an example that they'd like to share in the chat to get others inspired or excited, or even just help each other out with word choices, we know that we are not going to all craft this in 2 minutes, but we want to give you the space to think through it. If you have any thoughts, we're all here for you. Let's move on to that next step in the model for problem messages, and we can revisit more at the end.
And feel free to keep posting them in there as you continue developing your belief messages. But we started, right, this narrative framework with this high level belief message, and that tells people who we are and why we do what we do. And now we're going to move into that second part of our model, our problem messages. And this is the point where we're ready to start talking about why your organization exists. With your problem messages, we will start to illustrate the problem in society that your organization exists to solve. So this is where we can paint a more vivid picture of why your work is so important. And by speaking directly to your audience about it, the audience that you want to reach, you'll start to build some authority around the problem. And that sets you up to have some authority around the solution. And that really goes also for any numbers that you want to share. So if you have data that you want to highlight, this is really a good place to bring it into context. It helps to build that trust and that credibility and really that relevance of your organization. And the problem message ultimately comes down to, why does your organization exist? There is a problem that your organization was likely founded to address, and it's the big picture stuff that makes your work still necessary and important. And something to note here is that problem messages are not meant just for new audiences. So even those people who are closer to your organization, like board members or volunteers, they also need to be reminded about those big problems that you're tackling, because it keeps them involved and engaged. And that means you should be using your problem messages pretty frequently. So when you're introducing somebody to your organization for the first time with a belief message and they seem interested in learning more, of course, when you're writing an appeal letter to new or existing donors, to remind those people or your board or donors at the start of a meeting why you're doing this work, why it's so important. And of course, on social media to contextualize why you're sharing what you're sharing. So we want to share with you an example from a client we just learned about, Wu Yi Children's Services. We just heard their belief message. And we want to help you understand how you can bridge your belief message down to your problem message. So we're going to set the scene here with that belief message again, and then we'll take a look at one of this organization's problem messages, and we'll talk about a few of the things that work really well. So let me tell you about Wu Yi Children's Services. We believe that nothing is more essential than excellent childcare and education for all of our children right from the start. So every day we partner with parents as well as countless individuals and organizations across San Francisco to provide a network that strengthens and connects a diverse community around our children. Because when we stand up for our children, we stand up for one another. So now you're understanding a little bit about who we are and why we do what we do. So let me tell you, there's a problem. We know that children are learning from the moment they're born, and that ages 0 to 5 are critical to their educational path. Yet as a society, we don't value the very people who are vital to those early days. And early childhood educators and caregivers, they have been grossly undercompensated for years. And while training and educational requirements continue to increase, pay and benefits have not. If we want our children to have the best start possible, we have to support teachers and caregivers with livable pay and benefits that reflect their critical value. So this problem message, it starts by saying that despite knowing that early years of education are vital, we don't always value, and often we underpay those teachers. That's the problem. And then the rest of this message explains how those hurdles start to add up. And it starts to introduce the real need for advocacy for early childhood educators, which is a place where this organization shines. And for a lot of nonprofits, including perhaps yours, boldly claiming that you are the only organization that can solve a problem, it can feel a little bit uncomfortable. Of course, you don't need your peer organizations or even want your peer organizations to fail so that you can succeed. That's not how this works. But you are competing for support. And supporters and partners need to be able to see and understand why you are such an important voice at the table. And so to secure that support, you have to be able to emphasize in the most clear language possible what problems you are focused on solving as an organization. And doing so positions you as that trustworthy expert who can start to solve it. So when you sit down to actually identify and start to write your problem messages, we have some thought starters and questions here that you can ask yourself to help get you started. What are the problems that give rise to the need for your organization? In just one sentence, what are those problems? Just start to list them out. And maybe consider all of your programs, your services, your offerings, and work backwards from there. What are the societal problems that are being addressed as a result of you offering those things? So hopefully answering these questions will help you identify what the problems are that you need to talk about at all. And then you can start to write messages that really build your authority around knowing them, understanding them, and therefore being able to tackle them. And just like that belief message template, we are going to share these questions after today, so you don't have to scramble to write them down or take a picture. We will send these in a follow-up so that you have them when you're ready to get started on your problem messages.
And one thing that we didn't include in today's session, just in the time, but we know is likely top of mind for you now, and especially at end of year, are your audiences. Every brand and organization has a diverse set of audiences that they're trying to meet where they are, and that often requires different types of communications at different times. Here at the problem message is where you can start that audience specific communication. And so as you're making that list of all the different problems that you're trying to help advance through your mission, you might also put next to that, who needs to know about this most, or who is this message most relevant to as you begin to craft it. And through this process, you can begin to create a narrative arc of different communications depending on who you might be talking to. We don't want to change the message. We always want to start in the same place, that core belief. But within those problems and storytelling and the details that we're going to get into, we know that donors and clients and volunteers might have different interests in our work. And so here begins that audience-specific journey, and keeping those folks in mind as you begin to craft these messages will be really helpful in making sure your communications are pointed and clear. So we're back to the megaphone, moving around the brand message train, as I like to call it. We developed our foundational belief message, and Elisa helped us outline those problems that exist in society and community and education that give rise to the need for our work. So now it's time to tell a story that illustrates the impact that we're having in that space. We're not yet at the place where we're telling all the details about our programs. We first want to discuss impact. So the third step is an impact message, and an impact message does just that. It shows the impact of our work. And one of the best ways to show impact is by telling a story. And stories should, of course, be visual in nature and compelling, but they should also illustrate your unique point of difference in the way you deliver your work, because we do know that you have peers and partners and that there might be some overlap. But storytelling is the place where you can talk about what's uniquely you and what it looks like to be part of your mission. Lastly, your story should use asset-based framing. That's jargon, so we want to unpack that. Asset-based framing is a narrative model that defines people by their assets and their aspirations before noting their challenges and deficits. This model really invests in people for their continued benefits to society. And it's really a best practice in nonprofit communications that many have been working to sharpen over the past years. So if you think of it this way, if your goal is to invite stakeholders in through your storytelling into what's possible for the character in your story, it's not just about averting negative outcomes, which by nature puts them in a deficit situation to begin with. We want to make sure the stories that we tell are highlighting characters' strengths before all else, so we can contextualize them as full people. Can everyone see my slides? I saw a comment that someone can't see slides. Visual? Clear? Pamela, maybe that's a yes. Okay. Yes, we can see them. Okay.
Confirmation.
Casey, close your eyes, listen to the sound of my voice. Hopefully the slides that we share afterward will be a good follow-up, but you might also try exiting and coming back in, and maybe they'll be live for you. I'm sorry that there's any issues. So stories, they're great to use in a lot of different places. We use stories often in nonprofit storytelling because we want to showcase what we do and why it matters. Of course, maybe when we're talking to a donor or a client, if they're showing interest in knowing more, we want to talk about the people that we're supporting and how they're supporting their own growth and show that through a story. It's always compelling during a speech to be able to share a story if possible, or in an article, in a newsletter, and of course on your website, though not the homepage. We don't always recommend that be that first thing you see, maybe as you're moving through the user experience. And we've been able to tell a few other parts of our story before telling stories themselves. So what makes a good story? We know that there are all sorts of frameworks out there that can, give you a good story. We offer just one of those, which is made up of 4 parts, that there's 4 steps in creating an impactful anecdote. First, setting up by introducing the characters and defining them by their strengths and aspirations. We really see this as an opportunity to set your storytelling apart by ensuring that you're using that asset-based framing when you're introducing the folks that are part of your story. Second, introducing a pivotal event that sets that story into motion. And then introducing the challenge, the problem, a hurdle or two that the characters might be overcoming, or what's happening that your organization becomes a part of. And fourth, and finally, the resolution or a wrap that demonstrates your unique value without making you star of the show. So there's a few pieces of this we want to break down. First, demonstrating your unique value. We want to make sure that you are telling a story that is uniquely you. We don't want the story to just end in a way that it feels like it could be a story for any organization. It needs to be wrapped up in a way that feels like we really understand how this could only take place at your organization, and that we are compelled to be a part of it. And lastly, we want to do this in a way that doesn't make us the star of the show. We don't want to be saviors. We don't want to position ourselves as such. We often want to be seen as partners that are walking side by side with the communities that we serve. And so we want to make sure that we're telling stories in a way that does that. This wrap piece, it's important, especially in end of year asks. You need to make sure that your story ends in a way that feels like it's you. And so having a wrap or a sentence, that kind of introduces or ends out your stories is a way that just really helps you not only deliver on your unique point of difference, but it can also serve as a tool for identifying which stories are worth telling. Once you write a wrap for your stories and you start to apply it to past stories or future stories, if it feels like a great fit, then it's likely a really good story for your organization. If it feels a little bit forced or it doesn't quite work, then that might be a story for the parking lot because it might not be as connected to your work as it sounds like it is. So using that wrap is something that we see as a really valuable tool, especially as we're setting up end of year ask. We know that you probably have a lot of really good stories for your organization and about the people you serve, so we're not going to make you sit down and write one of those today. But what we do recommend you create that you might not already have is that wrap that's going to tie the story back to what makes your organization unique. So we can use these wraps again as that litmus test and just really use it as that bow that comes on the end of our stories and sets us up for success, and knowing that it's a message worth sharing. So just 2 examples from our friends at Wu Yi Children's Services that we've been following throughout today's webinar. Say we told a story that demonstrates, the impact of individual support, or connecting with a donor and talking about why that matters. We might wrap that up with something like, Wu Yi is committed to the success of children, but we can't do it alone. Our decisions and actions are led by asking what's best for each individual child, whether making the right referral, sourcing childcare, or providing coaching to parents. We work to ensure everyone in a child's life is empowered so all children realize their full potential. There's a call to action in that there's partnership still needed, but that individual and their support might understand their role in that by using that wrap. Second one, maybe a story about demonstrating partnership, how they leverage partnership and collaboration out in the community. Could wrap with something similar but slightly different, that we're committed to the success of children, but we can't do it alone. We partner with parents to ensure each child's success, from housing to job training, from food assistance to preschool. Wu Yi Children's Services knows it takes a holistic approach to ensure our children get the best start possible. So you're seeing these elements of asset-based framing of those that they serve throughout here, but they're also talking about how these stories are unique to them and inviting in participation as a way to call out the calls to action. So just a few key points of good storytelling in finding that right story. Again, this will be part of the takeaway that we send and leave with you, but we want to make sure that the stories you tell demonstrate the impact your organization has while reflecting what sets you apart. We want to know that the stories we're telling are stories that only you could tell. We need to make sure that we're thinking critically and decisively about telling stories and making sure that they feel uniquely us. So consider the space that you serve and carve your own within that market through your storytelling. Consider your end of year goals and what types of stories are going to align with that. If we have goals for next year or we're embarking on a campaign, we want to ensure we're illustrating impact in a way that lines up with that or demonstrates the need. And lastly, creating that wrap that serves as a litmus test for good storytelling and ties your story back to what makes your organization unique.
All right. Well, with that, that brings us to the last step of our megaphone here, or the last stop of our messaging train, to put it as Abby did. And let's review really quick, right? We start with that high-level introduction with your belief message. Then we shed light on your relevance and your value and your importance by talking about the problems that you exist to address. We give some examples of your impact. And now at the end, and really only now at the end, are we ready to talk about the actual details of your work? So if everything else is about laying out the why you matter, this is where we get into the how and the what, how you do your work and what you actually do on a day-to-day basis. So this is where you show how you achieve the results and the impact that you just laid out. You explain details and operational specifics, and you do all of that to set you up to invite your audience's participation and engagement, which is of course highly relevant for any end of year asks that you might be getting ready to make. So your detail messages will come into play, of course, once you've established credibility and really inspired interest to get to this point. But when you do, they work beautifully on your website, not on your homepage, which really is that introductory place, but on interior pages of your site where you're introducing programs or talking about certain services. Of course, in a grant proposal, they become really great ways to introduce the work that you're talking about. And the same goes for specific requests of donors or major donors when you need to talk about specific features of your work. So you might remember earlier in this session, we talked about highlighting benefits, not features, and I gave you that leash example. And this is where we really start to activate that approach and that mindset. We need people to understand why something matters, what value it offers them, before they can pay attention to, before they can care about the details themselves. So this example shows how we do that. It leads with the benefit first. When children have healthy meals and snacks throughout the day, they are able to focus, learn, and grow best because they are nourished from the inside out. And then we bring in the feature of your work. The Child Care Food Program feeds more than 1,500 children every day by providing our scores of family child care educators with meal reimbursements. So we start with that value, why it matters that kids have access to healthy meals, and then how you're delivering on that value. And that formula, when we do this great thing starts to happen, is a really helpful starting place for writing your detail messages. So as part of your takeaway today, we recommend completing that sentence. When we do this, this is the great thing that we see happening in our community or in society or for the people that we serve. And another way to land here is to take a look at your data. If you hand out 500 backpacks a year, or if you've increased literacy rates in your community by 45%, what are the benefits of that impact? Think about it that way, back into it, and then lead with those benefits as you get ready to make those asks. So that's our model. That is our minute message model. And it's one that really works because it leads with the inspiring, compelling parts of why you do what you do, so that by the time you get to the actual details of your work, your audiences are really engaged and interested in learning more. So your belief message introduces your organization and it piques interest. Your problem messages highlight why it's so important that this organization exists. Your impact messages bring to life the impact that you have every day. And then the detailed messages really bring it home by shedding light on how you do it. We want to thank you all for being here with us, and we can open it up for any questions that you have about any part of this model, or you want to share your belief message with us. We can talk about those too.
And one thing I'll just share while people might be putting things in the chat is that this model also really sets you up to make direct asks there at the details. You might have a program specific feature or a space that really needs support at year end or any time of year, and building this comprehension about your organization and your impact leading up to that detail information or the request or call to action around it just provides a little bit more depth, and people can have an emotional connection to your work and understand why all the other pieces of your work are essential, and hopefully become involved in it in different ways. But hopefully you can see the way this builds up to that direct ask within the detail space, so people have comprehension of who you are, why it matters, and what you do. Thanks for spending your time with us today.
Thanks, everybody.